May is National Cancer Research Month, and today we are going to be discussing an exciting tool in the world of cancer research, the Explorer Whole Body Scanner. My name is Chris Joyce. I'm with the communications team with the Comprehensive Cancer Center, and joining me today is Simon Cherry, Distinguished Professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering, and Ramzi Badawi, Professor and Vice Chair for Research in the Department of Radiology and Chief of Nuclear Medicine. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today.
You're very welcome. It's glad to be here.
All right. And you can see by our screens that we are doing absolute proper social distancing because we are not even in the same locations. But let's just dive in because it is National Cancer Research Month. First off, tell us what Explorer is and what it does.
So Explorer is a revolutionary new medical imaging device. It really is the first device in the world that can image the entire human body at once. So in one shot, we capture images of the whole body. And the reason that's particularly exciting for cancer patients is that, of course, cancer is a disease that affects the whole body, and we need to be able to look everywhere to seek out where the cancer may be hiding. And this machine really gives us the chance to do this with unprecedented image quality.
Explorer is different than a conventional PET scanner. Is that correct?
So it operates with the same principles, but it is a much longer because the detectors in the machine cover and view the entire body at once. So it looks like a long tube. It looks like many of the other medical imaging devices that are out there. But the difference is that we're actually capturing information from everywhere in the human body all at once. But it is, in terms of how it works just the same as any other PET scan.
So does it take just as long, or does it take longer because it's doing the entire body?
So we have choices, actually. Because we're collecting so much more signal, we have opportunities to either get much better quality images, which is the direction we tend to go in for our clinical care. But there are also opportunities to collect information extremely rapidly. We're doing that in some research applications. And there's also the opportunity to reduce the amount of radiation dose that we give to our subjects. And we're also doing that in our clinical studies as well.
That's a perfect little segue. How is Explorer being used in cancer research right now?
Ramzi, I'll let you go now.
Okay. So we've got a couple of different projects going on right now in cancer research. So one of those is looking at what we call dynamic changes over time. So the way a PET scan works is you take, like, say, a molecule like a radioactive sugar, and then you inject that into the patient, and then the sugar is transported all the way around the body, and it's taken up by cells that use sugar. And it turns out that cancer cells use more sugar than regular cells do. So this stuff gets sucked up into the cancer cells. And typically with a PET scan, what we would do is we'll have the patient sit quietly for an hour or so while the sugar circulates and gets sucked up by the cancer. And then we'll take a snapshot of the distribution of sugar in the body. And where we see hotspots of sugar concentration, that may be where the cancer is. So what we're doing, though, is because we can capture the whole body at the same time, we're actually making a movie of the sugar moving around the body and getting sucked up by the different tissues. And that gives a whole bunch of new, what we call biomarkers, things to measure how the body is behaving by means of this movie of the drug moving all the way around the body. So that's very, very exciting. Other things we're starting to look at is, can we use this kind of technology to look at systemic effects of cancer? So, for example, one of the things that often happens to cancer patients is they may lose weight. They may become what we call cachectic. And we can use the Explorer scanner to try and understand that whole process better, because we're able to look at the whole body simultaneously. There are all sorts of other things that we can look at as well. So there are some antibody agents which are being used for therapy these days. And we can label these with radioactive materials and then image those over a long period of time to see how the drug is interacting with the cancer and how the drug is interacting with the body. So there's all sorts of really tremendous opportunities here for looking at new drugs, for looking at behavior with respect to existing drugs, and for understanding the biology of cancer in more detail.
Wow, that's really interesting that you can then um, just watch it over time, and I guess the detail is much better with Explorer than in traditional scans. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's think about this. So a conventional PET scanner is about this long. It's about 15 to 20 centimeters, so 6 to 12 inches long. So you can capture 6 to 12 inches of the human body at one time. So if you want to image all the body, you have to step the patient through the scanner, which is great. And you get some really, really valuable information doing that. But while I'm imaging one chunk of the body, the rest of the body is outside the field of view. And I'm not capturing that information. So if I want to do what we call a dynamic image, I have to shuttle the patient backwards and forwards in the scanner. And while I'm doing that, of course, I'm losing all the signal for the parts of the patient that are not within the scanner. So I can do that kind of technique, but it's extremely difficult, and you really don't get very good signal at all if you try that technique. So we get much, much better signal, and we're able, therefore, to make these movies, and we can use much higher frame rates than you would be able to in a regular scanner because our signal density is so much higher. And that, in turn, produces a lot more information, some information that we didn't even anticipate that we'd be able to get. So one of the things that we've discovered is that when you first inject the radioactive material, you can actually watch the heart beating in real time with this scanner, which we had no idea that you'd be able to do. And so when we first saw that, we were absolutely taken aback. And it turns out there's a lot of interesting information in watching those first few seconds of the drug moving from the blood vessels into the tissue. And again, we're only at the start of even figuring out what questions to ask with that kind of information, because we haven't had access to that information before. So there's a whole revolution of new science and new knowledge that we're all tearing at now to try and understand more about it.
Well, and that leads me to say that outside of, like, obviously looking at the cancer and how the sugars in the radioactive or the drugs interact with that to be able to see where it's at or where it's spread. And you mentioned how weight loss is happening and how the body is reacting in that way. Are there other imaging applications that you see or that you're using now, or maybe that you even foresee in the future that Explorer could execute?
Oh yeah, for sure. So we started working with UCSF actually at imaging HIV. So the folks at UCSF in the radiochemistry department, they've developed an antibody that sticks to the protein coat of the HIV virus. And it's got some radioactive material on it, and you can put it in a PET scanner and see it. So patients who have HIV have had this drug injected at UCSF, and then they've driven up to Sacramento, and we've scanned them on Explorer and got really quite astonishing images out of it. So the next step in that area then is actually to look at COVID-19, actually. And we're very interested to see how the immune system responds to COVID-19. And COVID-19, of course, interacts with cancer as well. So there's a lot to be learned, I think, looking at how this new disease interacts with cancer, and in terms of the therapy and in terms of the immune response. So there's a huge opportunity there, which we're looking to pursue. We're actively working with a company that's got an agent that what it does is it sticks to immune cells. So we can then watch immune cells moving around the body. And maybe get some idea of what their function is and how that function is being changed by the virus. And of course, immune cells are also implicated in cancer as well. So there's a whole bunch of interactions there that we could learn more about with this technology.
In fact, that agent that we're going to use was originally developed primarily for cancer applications. So it was to look at responses to immunotherapies, and so we're sort of hijacking that same agent now to look at responses to COVID-19.
The future of cancer research. How do you think that Explorer is going to influence that?
So I think Explorer can contribute in a number of ways. So So first of all, I mean, cancer is a systemic disease. This is the big problem with cancer. It spreads, and so the ability to see the whole body is going to be critical in any new treatment, response to that treatment, in then following up patients who are hopefully in remission. This ability to see the whole body, I think, is a big breakthrough. And then in terms of cancer research, because the treatments also have to impact the whole body, and it's a very complex system that involves, not just the tumor itself, but its interactions with the host, its interactions with the immune system, interactions with the microbiome. And now we have an imaging system that can really view the body as a system. And so I think that's very attractive to a lot of people as we start to think of the body and disease as more of a systems approach rather than individual organ or individual sort of disease entity. It's much more complex than that. We see that in all the interactions between cancer and other diseases and cancer treatments and their impact on the patient in the long term. And so I think there's so many opportunities here.
And to speak to what Simon's getting at here with one particular example, there's this thing called the abscopal effect. So what we sometimes see in radiation therapy is we give radiation treatment to one cancer, and what we see is sometimes other cancers in the body also respond to that therapy, which is not entirely clear how that mechanism works. It's probably something to do with the immune system being stimulated by the radiation and then going after the other cancers. It would be wonderful if we could find a way to really understand that mechanism. But of course, if you're studying these imaging biomarkers that I talked about earlier in one cancer on a regular scanner, and then the other cancer some distance away, you can't look at these two things at the same time. But with Explorer, you can. So it may be possible for us to capture signaling between the cancers or signaling across the immune system that it then changes the environment in which the cancers sit and causes this abscopal effect. That would be wonderful if we could figure that out. It'd be really, really, very, very interesting and potentially could lead to new therapies.
Well, and that also leads me to think that maybe that would speed up some of the therapies that happen. Like if we're studying in one area of the body where it's attacking this part of the cancer, but we don't know that it's happening in another area of the body, by using Explorer, we can make those ties and make that jump faster, and then which leads to newer discoveries or faster discoveries. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's one of the enormously exciting things about this technology, is that it enables us really for the first time to take a holistic approach to imaging the body, both in its healthy state and its diseased state.
And I think another aspect of this is drug development, and I think that's perhaps partly what you were hinting at in your question. This system does give us the ability to watch the interactions of drugs throughout the whole body, and many new drugs, when they first go into human trials, one of the challenges is from all the preclinical testing, the companies tend to know that the drug is effective against the disease, but what they often don't know is what side effects are going to be, where else in the body it's going to accumulate. And animal studies are not always predictive of what happens in humans. We have different enzymes in our body that metabolize different drugs differently. So it's actually quite hard, and that's why a lot of drugs fail. You go into these very lengthy, very expensive clinical trials, and they often fail because of unanticipated side effects. So if we have imaging tests that can more quickly see that too much of the drug is going to a critical organ like the kidney, for example, that may allow you to kill a drug early on and save a lot of time, money, and effort, and invest that elsewhere. An alternative, of course, to identify drugs that have good profiles for moving forward into clinical trials. So, the pharmaceutical industry, uses PET a lot already, but they see Explorer, I think, as another opportunity because, again, we can get a pro.
I think we may have lost Simon for a moment.
Yeah, we have there.
Uh-oh.
So,
Uh-oh.
oh, you're back. You're back.
I don't know why the connection is so bad. It could be we have multiple people attending classes right now.
Yeah, it's
Bandwidth
rough.
limits. So where did I get cut off?
You're talking about killing drugs that weren't effective.
Yeah. So yeah. So I don't know where I got to in that statement. But I think one of the opportunities is for the drug companies. One of the things they need to know early on is whether a drug is going to have unanticipated side effects, meaning that it accumulates in areas of the body where it can cause harm. And so, one thing that PET scanning can do, and Explorer in particular, because it can see all the tissues and organs of the body, is actually measure the concentration of the drug everywhere over time after it's been administered. And therefore, we can identify much earlier drugs that are likely to have bad side effects versus drugs that have a much better profile and can be advanced into these more expensive multi-center clinical trials. So I think more and more drug companies are trying to use PET earlier on as they first go into human. It really gives them an exceptional tool for doing those kinds of studies.
There's some other areas as well that we're starting to investigate, which is looking at healthfulness and mindfulness. So we know that mindfulness and things like meditation can improve outcomes and can improve health. What we don't really understand is what the mechanisms are whereby these kinds of practices, how does that impact the body, and why is that helpful for health? Absent that kind of direct scientific evidence, there's some resistance, of course, in some parts of the community to accepting these kinds of practices for improving healthfulness. So we're very interested in trying to unpick the scientific mechanisms that underpin, the biological mechanisms that underpin this interaction between the mind and the brain, and how healthy brain practices can improve healthy, when I say mind and brain, I meant mind and body. So healthy mind practices can then improve the health of the body. And if we can understand that, I think we could serve humanity very, very well, actually, because these kinds of practices are cheap. And part of our problem, of course, now is the enormous expense of medical care. And that, of course, is true in cancer, but it's true across all of healthcare. So if we can find scientific underpinnings for these practices that do appear to be helpful, and perhaps encourage their adoption where we have proven that they are helpful, that would serve society very well.
That is exciting. How many Explorer machines are in Northern California, or even in existence?
Well, there's only one in Northern California. There's only one in California. There's only one in the whole United States, and that's ours. There are the company that we contracted to make Explorer has now made it commercially available. I believe they have installed roughly 6 scanners now in China, in addition to the one that we have here in the United States. So there's about 7 in the world right now.
And we were the first. Is that correct?
We built the first one. Yes, that's right. With the company.
That's outstanding. Yeah. Well, how long have you been up and running with it, and are you seeing an increase in your usage and in your research as time goes on?
So the first research study done in June of 2019, so just under a year ago, and we did our first clinical scan, our first patient scan in August of 2019. So our clinical studies are still continuing apace, even despite COVID-19. There's no slowdown. Cancer happens whether COVID-19 is there or not. And so our clinical business, on the research side, we have unfortunately had to halt most of our human research studies, which are deemed non-essential at this time. But we hope to get those up and running again soon.
All right. Well, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you feel is pertinent, or maybe is interesting, whatever that is, that our patients, our community would benefit from knowing about Explorer?
Yeah, I'm not thinking of anything. I mean, it's available to everyone who needs it. I mean, what we typically do is there's a little bit of sort of screening that goes on. We talk to the referring physicians to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. But we're basically serving the general cancer population at UC Davis. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything critical here that we want to get across that we haven't already covered. Simon, you got?
Yeah, I think that, the only other thing we could say is that already in the patient studies that we've been doing, we've been learning a lot that I think will impact protocols in the future. So I think there are things that we are seeing on this scanner, because we can see all the time points and all the parts of the body, that are probably going to inform clinical protocols on regular scanners for the future. So we're building that evidence right now, and then we'll be presenting it to our colleagues and peers through conferences and peer-reviewed publications in the months and years to come. But I think Explorer will change clinical practice.
Well, that's exciting, and I'm excited to see where it goes and how things progress, and what new understandings that you uncover through all of your research. Thank you so much for joining us today.